Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I worked at a fairly well-known restaurant in a small northern New England city as an assistant manager. The owners were very successful restaurateurs with several successful non-chain establishments and spent maybe a day or two a month in our location. The rest of the time, there was a general manager in charge. We will call her Jan. Jan was about as type A as they come. She was a middle-aged woman, but beautiful and petite, and she always looked put together and primed. Jan had started with the owners a decade earlier in their first restaurant as a server and had worked her way up to general manager over the years. At first I just thought she had extremely high standards, which I respected. I have high standards as well and take pride in my work. I have been impressed by how the kitchens were spotless. The staff was immaculate, like run a white gloved hand under the back of the oven and it comes back white kinda clean. And the food was always top quality. I had frequently been a customer and was thrilled that I got the job there. I had been in the business for a decade and that restaurant was a place in our area. I had been in the business for a decade and that restaurant was a place in our area. I was so excited. Unfortunately, I quickly learned why everything is so shining and perfect. Jan was a tyrant. She was the kind of boss who soured the mood of the entire staff like a storm cloud hovering over us that never went away. Nothing was ever good enough and the standards changed from day to day. On a good day, she would shut herself up in the office and then leave early. Good days were very rare and could turn into bad days at the drop of a dime. On bad days, you couldn't be perfect enough and she would come up with new rules and regulations just to punish people. If a host called out sick, they were literal children. She would berate them on the phone and make them cry. If a cook made a mistake on a plate, she would humiliate them in front of the staff, accuse them of doing it on purpose, and then give us all the silent treatment for hours after. Seriously, if someone's cash out was off, even by a few cents, she would accuse them of theft and force me to cut down their hours. As a fellow manager, I was mostly spared her awful behavior, though I had to hear about her treatment from my staff almost every day. All of this was just run-of-the-mill, bad boss stuff until it came time for our yearly staff evaluation meetings. This is where Raul enters the story. Raul was a hard-working dishwasher who had moved to our state from Puerto Rico a few years earlier and spoke English with some difficulty. Whenever I had to go over anything official with him, we would have a co-worker translate between us to be sure we were both communicating clearly. Jan refused this courtesy to Raul. This made his evaluation pretty difficult. Raul managed to communicate to us that due to recent cuts in his hours, he would be forced to get a second job to pay the bills. Something about this absolutely set Jan off. She told him she would fire him if he dared. I could see plainly on the intake paperwork in front of me that Raul had been hired with the understanding that it would be a full-time position, so I pointed that out. Jan was furious but agreed through gritted teeth that if Raul agreed not to get a second job, she would bump his hours up to at least 35 hours a week. It was stated as clear as day and I documented it in my daily manager logbook. Work went on as usual after that, and I didn't think much of this meeting again for a few months. Another time a while later, while filling out information for tax returns, Jan called me into the office. I could tell she had pulled the tiny room apart looking for something. All the information about our Puerto Rican employees is gone, she told me with a mixture of panic and suspicion. I looked at the files in question and they all seemed to be in order, so I was confused and told her I couldn't help. A few minutes later, I walked back into the office to find her arguing with Rosa, our most talented chef and the Puerto Rican native. Rosa was perfectly fluent in English. No, Rosa. Jan was speaking to Rosa as though she were hard of hearing or mentally slow. Where is your green card? What are you talking about? Rosa was confused. Are you an illegal or something? Is that why one of you broke in here to hide the proof? Jen wasn't yelling. But her eyes were cold and flashing with rage. What? Rosa was starting to get angry now. It suddenly clicked for me. So I interrupted. Jen, you do realize that Puerto Rico is a United States territory, right? Of course I know that. Jen snapped back. Okay, so you know that Rosa has a social security number like any other American native? Oh, right. Never mind, Rosa. You can go back to work now. Jan did not apologize for accusing Rosa of theft. I was so done with this place after that. Jan did all kinds of little things like that and she never apologized. I had already gotten a job offer for a place closer to my house when the final straw came. I was a closing manager one day and got in just before the dinner rush to see Raul storming out the back door. He didn't speak much English, but his freaking B was very clear. Jan had lied about raising his hours to 35 per week, so Raul had gotten the second job he talked about. When Jan found out, she fired him, but not before saying something about how all you illegals are the same. She was really fixated on these American citizens being illegal aliens for some reason. By this point, I freaking hated this woman too. She once told me my clothing made me look poor in front of the whole staff. I was wearing what she made me wear. Meanwhile, she wore open-toed shoes behind the line, which is against the health codes. And once her fake nail fell into the coleslaw and she wouldn't let anyone toss it out after she retrieved it. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I have a life to live. Since I knew I would be leaving soon anyway, I told Raul he should go after our boss for wrongful termination since I had documented proof with Jan's signature that he had been promised more hours and that Jan had broken the agreement, not Raul. The last time I saw Jan was on my way out of Raul's lawyer's office after giving a deposition about several labor laws she had violated, at least the ones that I knew about. Apparently, there were many others she had broken in front of other employees. She couldn't even look me in the eye. The best part? In my deposition, I learned that Jan was actually the one who was illegally in the country. Her green card had recently expired. She was a Canadian. She ended up being sent back to Canada as a result of this case and no one has heard from her since. Raul was granted 6 months of unemployment pay, plus the restaurant had to pay his legal fees. They closed that location not long after. Maybe they should hire their managers more carefully next time. Jan, if you're reading this, I hope you got your crap together. I also hope you learn to wear closed-toe shoes behind the line. You wouldn't want to end up a huge, gigantic screw-up due to your own negligence now, would you? This happened several years ago, around 2017. I had left college the year before and already had a job in a small family-owned restaurant. I was looking for a second job so that my roommate and I could save up to get our own apartment. We were living with her family at the time, and Rumi was also searching for a job. She was having a harder time of it due to multiple leg injuries as well as other health complications, but eventually we found a restaurant that was getting ready to open, and it was on the same street as my current job. I picked up 2 applications on my way into work one morning and turned in the filled applications the next day. On my day off, we went in for our interviews, and at the start, the manager said, "This is really just a formality, I'm going to hire you both anyway." We both thought that was a good sign. The new restaurant was going to be a 24-hour diner, similar to Denny's and Waffle House. The lady who gave our interviews used to be a Waffle House manager, but it was 50s themed, and it was across the street from several bars. As the interior of the restaurant was still under construction, no one outside of management and construction crew could be in a restaurant for the next few weeks, and the management told us that they would text us when it was time to start training. Yeah, make that about 2 months before we hear about any sort of training. Already not a good sign. Once training started, it became clear that these people had no clue what the heck they all needed to do. You know how a restaurant is on kitchen nightmares before Gordon Ramsay comes and does an overhaul? Yeah, pick one of the worst restaurants and you're getting close to the crap this place pulled. Can't take any breaks no matter how long your shift is. Can be seen rehydrating in front of customers. And don't get me started on what we found in some of the food. One thing I also forgot to mention earlier, this was a two-story restaurant. Remember those multiple leg injuries that my roommate has that I mentioned earlier? She made sure that the management knew about it, and they said each time that they wouldn't put her upstairs. That night of the soft opening, it was clear that they had lied, because they put her upstairs, meaning that she would have to go up and down the stairs to get the food for her tables multiple times a night with a bad leg. When she asked to switch sections with another girl, the managers told her to get over it. One of the other waitresses was the manager's niece, and major favoritism was given to her. This girl had no clue what the heck that she needed to do. She kept dropping everything, took forever to key orders in the computer system, and couldn't even mix a basic vanilla milkshake. On the soft opening night, the niece and my roommate were in similar sections, and my roommate would often help out the niece with figuring out the system. Slightly in the niece's defense, this system was a witch that would repeatedly crash multiple times a day. Well, guess who went to her auntie and said that my roommate had shoved her off of the computers and was stealing her customers. After the soft opening, the managers just seemed to be itching for a reason to fire me and my roommate, but they couldn't because neither of us had any write-ups, and any bullying accusations that the niece tried to pin on us were quickly disproved by other waitresses. And then the restaurant started opening for real. July 13, 2017 was when the pot boiled over. This was one of my days off, but Rumi had to work that night. My aunt and uncle from Minnesota were in town that night, and my parents called me and offered to all go to dinner that night at the diner to help support my roommate. Well, the kitchen screws up again, and it's so bad that my uncle asks to speak to the manager. He was very open to my family about what his complaint was. The kitchen had royally screwed up the Reuben sandwich that he had ordered, but the manager told Rumi that my uncle's complaint was about her service. I stayed behind since I was her ride and Fam left. She was in a section downstairs this time. About half an hour after Fam leaves, I had a milkshake on hold and looked around the restaurant and realized that I didn't see Rumi. I had seen her a little bit ago leaning against the wall and figured her leg was bothering her. But I don't see her anymore, so I started looking for someone to ask them for that milkshake. Almost as soon as I realize this, I see her coming down the stairs. She doesn't look towards me, but instead goes behind the milkshake bar, and I hear her politely ask for one of the other waitresses to let her by so that she can get her backpack. As soon as I heard that, my heart dropped. I knew exactly what had happened. Why she had been upstairs. Well, that's where the office was. I packed up when I saw her go into the restroom and she came out in her street clothes. We had uniforms at this diner. I was ready to go and one of the hosts came over to us asking if we were okay. She brushes by him and exits the building, and I simply tell him to cancel the milkshake and follow Rumi out of the restaurant. He follows us asking if everything's okay, and Rumi turns around and exclaims, "They fired me because I leaned against the wall for 45 seconds. Oh hell no. I ask her to wait for me and go back into the building. Fortunately for me, one of the managers is already downstairs and I call to her to get her attention. Thanks to theater, I know how to project my voice and I make sure that the whole building can hear me when I tell her, because you fired my roommate over an injury that she made sure you were aware of, you can consider my employment terminated as well." Comes to find out the whole story from Rumi later, managers have been creating false write-ups for her and false complaints, like my uncle's, and all sorts of other crap, like the fake bullying charges, to use as an excuse to get rid of her. And now comes the part that you've been waiting for, the revenge. See, Rumi's family knows some people who are pretty high up in the city/state, such as the city sheriff and one of the senators of our state. So one of her family members got her a meeting with said senator and she told him everything that this diner had done. He gave her the contact information to both the labor board as well as a little company called OSHA Don't know if you've heard of them. As well as a little company called OSHA. Don't know if you've heard of them. While she got in contact with them, I started a hashtag on Facebook, spreading the story and asking my friends to do the same. Whenever she and I were in town together and were having conversations with the locals, anytime that the conversation turned to good restaurants in the area, we made sure to warn them about the treatment that they gave to their staff and asked them to spread the story. It got to the point where Rumi even overheard other people, even lawyers, talking about it on the street and in the coffee shop that she stayed in while waiting for me to get off of work. My boss at my primary job knew everything that was going on at this diner, having heard both me and Rumi express our concerns and frustrations, and once we were no longer working there, she and the rest of her staff joined us in cracking jokes and throwing major shade at this diner. I still remember fondly to this day her saying that the drunks are the only reason that place is staying open. Even some of my co-workers were lurking for dirt on this diner. And on November 13, 2017, literally 4 months to the day that they pulled that crap, a cook at my job asked me, "So, did you hear that the diner is closed now?" Wait, what? I had to pull out my phone and check. Sure enough, there it was in the local news. The diner was closing their doors, effective immediately. The excuse that they gave was management change and that it was only temporary. But to this day, space that the diner had occupied is still boarded up. Romy and I went out for celebratory milkshakes that night. We did not expect that the whole place will be closed down, but we do not regret making those calls or Facebook posts. It was one day when my mother asked me to go to the local grocery store to pick up some things for her. She was preparing for a big feast on Thanksgiving, since my parents were inviting most of our family members to spend it with us this year. She had bought most of the stuff she needed but sent me to pick up a few things she missed. I took my bike and ran to the store with a list my mom wanted me to get. I know my way around this store. I know the employees working there and they do know me very well. I come across one of the staff members that I'm quite familiar with and we exchange pleasantries for a moment, catch up and wish each other a happy Thanksgiving. It wasn't a minute before a well-known Karen that is frequenting the store appeared out of nowhere right in front of us and just started berating the staff member about how he's ignoring her needs/his job right in the midst of a busy day like this and standing right there chatting with little kids that aren't even his age. She kept threatening the poor guy about calling his manager and getting him in trouble for not doing his job or worse, getting him in trouble for hitting on little kids in public. Seriously, the guy was just one of the nicest people I know, and he never once crossed a line with me or anyone else I know of. I always thought that he's providing some amazing customer service and he's one of the few people that seem to be enjoying what he does. He apologizes to her, not politely to me, and then tries to calm her down and asks her what she needs help with. I am not the most confronting person out there, so while she was on her horrible rant to this poor staff member, all of me was screaming on the inside that she was wrong, that she's a terrible person for what she's doing to this good guy, and that she needs to leave him alone. But sadly, I just couldn't get myself to scream all of that out loud to her face. I just froze there and watched the staff member smile painfully to me before going away and vanishing between the aisles after she kept dragging him around. At that moment, I really wished for some justice, some karma that will put this woman in her place. She's an evil one. She's not just some entitled person asking for attention. I was old enough to understand that the accusations she was threatening him with could easily send him to prison for a long time and even stain him for the rest of his life. She was not afraid to do that to someone she knew well was innocent of all the horrible stuff she was accusing him of. I swallowed all of that, got washed with the painful feeling of being useless, and just decided to move on and go get what my mom sent me to get. 10 minutes go by and I start hearing a lot of screaming coming from where the Karen and the staff member disappeared earlier. Charged with a huge emotional wave that took over me, I decided to turn towards where she is and just tell her off and to stop abusing my good friend and to leave him alone. It was unfamiliar territory to me, but I made up my mind. If I was ever going to stand up to some evil person, it was right now. It was to this woman. When I arrived to where she is, I took a deep breath and tried to prepare myself for voicing out how I feel about her and how I despise people like her. However, upon closer look, I see her shrieking and screaming, but it wasn't towards the same staff member from before. Actually, it wasn't any of the staff members that I know of at least. It appears to be a customer. No, wait. Oh God, that's not a customer. I mean, he is, but it's not just any customer. That's Steve, one of the most dangerous people in our town. I know that full well because my mom kept telling me if I ever came across him to just look down and get out of his way as much as possible. Steve was a well-known criminal in this town, convicted in more than 10 cases at least, that was known for getting involved in a lot of gang activities. He was someone that had a quiet demeanor aside from a nasty scar on his face. If you didn't know him, you wouldn't really think that he's that dangerous. I froze in my place when I recognized it was him. I noticed a staff member from before running towards the manager's office to grab him and probably call the cops when he saw that Karen started picking a fight with the one man in town that she shouldn't pick a fight with. I went home that day without getting a single item from the list my mom gave me, but I seriously had my reasons. I went to the store a couple of days after what happened that night and decided to ask the staff member what the heck got her to screech at this guy to start with. And he started telling me what happened after he nodded to me and left with her. He told me that she was just pestering him to find her some stuff all over the store while keeping up with the vile threats. Then she bumped into Steve while walking backwards. She caused him to drop what he was picking from the shelf and then started getting into his face about how he should watch where he's going and stuff like that. Steve did not say a word to her, just kept staring at her the whole time with dead fish eyes. And that got her aggravated even more. Now, I don't know if she knew who he was or not, but at that point, it didn't matter to be honest. She was a Karen. Karens think differently, but Karens think differently, process things differently, and act on it differently. After a good 5 minutes of screaming into his face, with the manager and staff member trying to calm her down and get her away from him, she shoved him. She probably did just to get any reaction from the numb guy standing right in front of her. That was the last thing she remembers doing before looking down to her stomach and seeing blood gushing out of it. It seemed as if she didn't realize what happened at first. It surely took her a moment to fall into the ground, and it took her a very rare, quiet, screeching-free moment to realize that she just got stabbed. Then panic ensued in the store after some bystanders witnessing the whole thing just saw what happened. The manager tries to contain the situation, begging Steve to just calm down and drop a weapon. But surprisingly enough, the guy that just stabbed the woman did not seem to lose his quiet demeanor. He had the same indifferent reaction on his face as before, and just stood there right where he was the whole time. Didn't try to run or attack anyone else. The cops arrived shortly after, and it seemed that the manager had called him right before any of that even happened. They didn't have a problem coughing up Steve or stripping him of the weapon he stabbed her with. EMTs took Karen on a stretcher, and everyone that witnessed the whole situation seemed as if they were just stunned, including me. I barely managed to get back home, and after some time I eventually managed to tell my mom what I just witnessed, and she just looked horrified. I heard later that Karen made it and that she didn't die because of her wound. And even a few months later, I was walking down the street with a couple of my friends and saw her limping to her car while using crutches. Sometimes I wonder if what happened that night to her had any connection to the fact that at one point when I was in that store, seeing her torture that poor guy, I truly wished for karma to strike that woman down and gives her what she deserves. I don't know if it was God answering to my emotional wish or was it a coincidence, but all I'm saying is that she brought this on herself and that she absolutely deserved it. I hope she learned her lesson and came up with something from that horrific experience. As for Steve, last I heard he was still in prison for many reasons actually aside from stabbing that entitled woman. I was reminded about this a few minutes ago when I had to stop to let a pack of bicycle riders slowly cross when I had the right of way. We have all been there. So years ago, I regularly took part in a bike ride across Iowa. This is called Rockbry, and it takes place every year in Iowa in the last week of July. Rundown of Rockbry. Rockbry is a rolling party of sunburn, alcohol, and pork chops. It's a ton of fun and everyone for the most part is kind and you don't have to worry about anything but where you left your bike after you went to the beer garden. I was part of a team. Teams rode together or separated to raise money for one thing or another. Our team stood out because we wore very outlandish things such as feathers. I rode a recumbent trike with two wheels up front and one in the back. I love my bike. I have spent thousands of dollars on upgrades and parts, completely going for as much carbon fiber as I could. Well, as I made my way into a small Iowa town, I could feel my gears not acting as they should. So I made note to stop at the local bike shop instead of the multiple bike companies that ride Rockbry and set up the tents because I like to support local businesses. When I found the shop, it was closed. Who on earth would close their bike shop knowing Rockbry is coming through? So off to the tents, and I get the suspected part to replace. I get the part, engrave my name into it, and bolt it on. I mark all my parts on Rockbry as though rare part thieves are a thing and my bike uses expensive parts. When I was a rookie at Rockbry, I was told to do this. So my team meets up and off to bagging, drinking, and overall have fun as is a thing. To give you a picture of Rockbry, imagine thousands of sweaty spandex-covered bikers clicking their bike shoes. Metal pedal clips all over town like drunken tap dancers. In hindsight, not so pretty, but oh my god, is it fun. Well, when you get to towns, you tend to just leave your bike unattended and not worry about it because thousands of bikers are everywhere and who would steal a bike on Rockbry? Anyway, going out, having fun, and finding a place to sleep is a routine. When I got up the next morning, my bike was upside down and looked an absolute mess. Someone hadn't stolen my bike. No. But picked it clean of parts, including the carbon wheels. I was beyond mad and called 911. Not probably the right number to call, but sue me. An officer comes and tells me that I am probably the 100th person to call this morning. I was beyond mad and called 911. Not probably the right number to call, but sue me. An officer comes and tells me that I am probably the 100th person to call this morning. He takes my report and doesn't give me hope as he leaves. I obsess on finding my parts and make my way to the tents, campground, and everywhere I can think to look. Eventually, I resigned to quitting Rockbry and having to order the parts. As I'm loading my bike onto the sagging wagon, I figure I may stop by the local bike store. I do, and it's open. I walk in, and the owner greets me and asks how he can help. My auto response is, just looking. Look I did, then look I saw. In the back room on his desk is my wheel and gearbox as well as my bike's manufacturer whip page. I lose it and tell him to give me my wheel. He balks and orders me out of the store or he will call the police. I tell him to call them. He stutters and tells me to get out or he will force me out. Now, I'm a big man that spent 7 years fighting overseas and at this point I'm eager to go hands-on, so I smile and invite him from behind the counter. He refuses and I call 911 again. The police show up and he tries to say I was robbing him. I explained I saw my bike parts on his desk and he was the one stealing parts off bikes all night. The cop knows the guy by name and asks to look in the back. The guy refuses. I know without probable cause this will go nowhere and the back door is now closed. Screw this, I say and push my way into the back room and grab my wheel with my name on the hub clear as day. I bring it out to the officer and show him. The owner starts yelling about illegal searches. I yell back I am not a cop and I don't care if I get a charge, but I've just brought him what he needs to search. Other officers arrive and the place is searched top to bottom. The owner is arrested and taken away. Rockbry is over for me, so I will stay. I called the Rockbry officials and explained what happened. They spread the word. Like a pack of hungover spandex-covered zombies, people start to stumble over to see what's up and reclaim parts. The officers don't let anyone take their parts, but let them identify them. Every part of my bike was recovered and held for evidence for roughly $3,000. Tons of other people claim their parts. The officers tag everything, take our information, and give us a case number. A few weeks later, it's a micro rock bri as doctors, attorneys, teachers, and all walks of life meet up and return to the small town for retribution. The guy refused offers and took it all the way to jury trial. I get the stand and explain that yes, I did assault the owner when pushing past to open the back door, and yes, I did trespass on and on. I still accomplished my goal of getting the evidence the officer needed. I was never charged and I had no repercussions. The defense tried to get the evidence and searched last, but it wasn't. He was found guilty of a ton of theft and other things unrelated. He even had lowered to an AR-15 in his shop and was already a felon, thus it counted as a firearms charge. In the end, he went away and his reputation was ruined. I've never been back to that town and also never rode